Welcome, everyone, to Conversations with Curio. My name is Jim Kantowski, a founder at Curio Wealth in Annapolis, Maryland. I am joined by my colleagues, Jake Sadler and Samantha Sachs. And today we have a little bit of a different conversation. We're going to have a firsthand conversation with Jake and Samantha to discuss their experience, essentially surviving the hurricanes and floods in Asheville, North Carolina. And so this could be a little bit personal, and so we're grateful to have them here to share their experiences. We're going to try and tie it to financial preparedness for a disaster, but we are going to spend some time on their personal journeys through this. It's been very difficult for them to go through, and it's been difficult for us to watch. So we're just going to have a good conversation around it. And so I just wanted to kick this off, Jake and Samantha, and get your sort of lay the sort of the framework for this, or the groundwork, and just remind you guys of where we were, I guess, a couple days before this all happened. We were celebrating a team gathering, and we were in Chicago for whatever reason, and building and business plan and having great conversations, and this was sort of on the horizon. I think you guys were aware of it. It was happening. I kind of recall Jake sending some texts with his wife talking about the river, but I'm going to be honest, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to it. I left on Friday, and next thing I find out is that you guys were really struggling even to get home. So, like, to me, I imagine that was really, really difficult for you guys. And I'm hoping you guys would just share a little bit about what it was like from that, I guess, Friday afternoon. We were supposed to leave Chicago and get home to Asheville, and just share your story there about what that was like, because I know it was difficult.
Yeah, and it's funny as you were, talking. I mean, it was on the horizon. Samantha and I, as we were leaving to head up to Chicago for our team event, the clouds were literally rolling in, and we knew the rain was coming, and there was kind of a storm that kind of sat over Asheville before the hurricane hit. So we knew a lot of rain was coming, and we got those texts while we were out of town that the rain just kept coming and coming. Started seeing videos of flooding. We did not really have any perspective as to how bad it was, until really right after the hurricane went through, and it was on the day we were supposed to be coming back to Asheville, which was, for at least me, which was that Friday. Was at the airport, and my flight was still going to happen. Um, and I was able, get texts back and forth with my family. I knew that they were okay. I knew it had been a lot of rain, and then my flight got canceled, and then the cell signal went out, and I wasn't able to communicate with my family anymore, and was kind of scrambling. Okay, how am I going to get back? And starting to get new information in, and it was really starting to roll in as to kind of what was happening, and it still wasn't the full story because all the communications in Asheville were out, so we really didn't know. But eventually, just ended up having to get a flight the next day. I booked a flight into Greenville, South Carolina, and was hoping I could rent a car from there and get home. But that night, more and more stories started coming in. All the roads in and out of Asheville were blocked, were closed. Landslides, floods had blocked everything, and it was really hard at that point because I wasn't able to communicate. I knew they were okay last time my family was, but just to see what was happening and not be able to communicate was really tough at that point.
So I got some questions on that, but Samantha, you had a little bit of a different experience. Do you mind sharing a little bit about, like, where you were in that process in terms of getting home?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like Jake was saying, like we could see the clouds kind of rolling in as we were flying out, and it was, kind of beautiful in this way. And then, as when we landed in Chicago, was when we first started getting reports of how much rain was coming down, and so we kind of knew this storm was there, but we didn't know before we left the extent to which it was, going to come. And so, yeah, it was somewhat similar where like the morning of when the storm was kind of cresting, I had heard from my family that they were okay. And then I had, as one of my neighbors called me and said, I just checked your house. Like I went out in the rain. It's okay so far. Cause I live in a very wooded area and like it could have been dicey. And then 10 minutes later, my other neighbor called me and said, hey, this giant tree came down, your car's totaled, it's on your house. And so like within those 10 minutes, like that changed. And like my neighbor was on the phone with me talking about the tree and lost contact. And that was the last I really heard from anybody for what, Jake, it was like 30 hours or something. That,
Yeah, I mean, wasn't. Yeah, I didn't get
yeah.
cell phone signal back for a long time.
And so it was
So
like,
I
okay,
just, oh, go ahead. So I was going to
I
say,
was going
like,
to say,
I
wait,
didn't mean to stop you, but I just got chills when you just said that. Like, what was that like when you lose communication with your family in a major storm? Like, to me, that would be one of the, like, forget about all the flights and all that stuff. Like, it makes it all like you got to get home as soon as absolutely possible because you can't communicate.
yeah, I mean,
Samantha,
that's exactly right. It was like, to know it's like, okay, maybe the storm's almost over and everybody's okay, but then a tree just now fell on my house. So, like, it's actually not okay. And what could happen next? Like, it's not over. And now we've lost contact. And, um, I mean, the only thing, and I mean, Jake and I were just like kind of going through this together of like not being able to reach anybody or get home. And it was like, the only thing I can think to do is get there as soon as I can because I have no information. So, like, that's the only next move, which was really difficult because at that time, the only way into Asheville is by helicopter. All flights were grounded, all the roads were damaged. Um, yeah. And so I ended up, my scheduled flight wasn't until Monday. So I was trying to get a new flight, but I knew that we couldn't fly into Asheville. Greenville was dicey because the roads at that point were still closed. And I ended up getting on with my car insurance. And I was like, hey, like, I was just told my car is totaled. Is there any way I can get my rental car here in Chicago so I can drive home? And he's like, like, we're not really supposed to do that because you're not actually with your car. And there was a lot of back and forth. And he was like, well, if you did it in Charlotte, then it's close enough. And I was like, well, I don't think there'll be rental cars by the time I get to Charlotte. And he, like, talked with the manager or whatever, and they ended up telling me, they're like, anywhere you fly you can get a car or you can get it there, and like really opened it up to so that I could get a car to try and get home by road, hoping that by the time I got there some of the roads would be open. um I ended up flying into Columbus, Ohio, where one of my childhood best friends best friend lives, and she like spent the whole day loading up gear from Costco and all these places, and packed my rental car with like as much as it could hold and shipped me off. And so I had to drive to Charlotte, then to Greenville, then up, because by then that was the route that was able to get in. Um, and there was a lot of dicey weather on my drive too, so it was just kind of this real chaotic thing.
wow. So
Yeah, and that
you're
feeling was
like
helplessness.
helplessness. Yeah, I feel
I
like
mean,
I don't even
I'd
know where
echo
to
that.
go with this right now. So your friend was just like, did she get the car for you, or you just got there? You guys got the car and you just packed water. I mean, imagine just your anything you could think of.
Yeah, well, I wasn't even, to be honest, like I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was just like, I need to get home to make sure my kid is okay. Like that was the only place my brain was. And of course, she's like, in this other place of wanting to support me. So I mean, my flight got in that night and the car was ready for the next morning, and she just like, it was food, water, flashlights, lanterns, like all these things, that batteries I wasn't weren't anywhere in my brain about. um and I still have some of that food, and like it's still helping me. But yeah.
Is she
So
well, how long was that drive from Columbus to take you from there?
Columbus to Charlotte should have been, I think, about maybe 5 hours, but it ended up taking me like 7 or 8, because as I was driving on the radio, I'm getting all of these like tornado warning messages. And of course, she's like the only one I can contact because everybody here is out of service still. Um, and so she was like, oh no, this one's like 40 miles east, you're okay. And it was just like pouring rain on me. And but I wasn't, I'm like going through these little mountain towns, like it wasn't really a safe place to stop either. It's a very stressful drive.
Wow. I didn't know that. So in the whole time you don't know whether your family's okay.
So my flight got in pretty late. When we pulled into Megan's driveway, I got a call from my son's dad's girlfriend, and she had drove somewhere high up to find service to call me, and she was able to say like, we're okay. And it was just like this flood of relief. Um, and but she's like, we still don't, like, we can't stay in contact. She had to like go find this spot, and that was kind of, people were starting to like trickle in that way. Like they would drive to, there was like the Lowe's parking lot or something had service. And so it was like, there was at least that, like, as I was driving, I knew like that they were okay. And, I thought about like, okay, since they're okay, should I stay put? But then, now my focus was able to return to like, maybe I need to go save my house.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Wow. Jake, you had a little bit different experience getting home. You actually made it to Greenville, but then it became sort of chaotic for you.
Well, yeah, it was it's similar in some ways. I mean, I think that the way that it was similar was just that feeling of helplessness, and it's funny. Just this is a great conversation because just thinking about the reliance that we have, and I take for granted the communication we have, like, and then for that to be cut off, and then it's just like I felt like I had control over communication, and now I actually don't, and so you just have that helpless feeling, like you're desperate to just do what you need to do to be back in control of the situation, which is get there, at least for me. So it's like, okay, I'm going to get as close as I can, and I will do whatever I need to do to make it all the way back. And that was my thought process. So it took me to Greenville, and I had booked a rental car, but when I got there, the counter was closed. They were out, and there was a really long line for another company. Standing in that line, and I heard a couple of people talking about ways up to Asheville, and I saw them get a car and secure a car, and just approached them and asked if I could join, and I'll contribute my fair share of the cost to get up there, and so we kind of partnered up and made our way back up. We didn't know what roads would be open, and we're all kind of the game plan was to get as far as we could, thinking we could get pretty close to our respective homes and then walk the rest of the way. So that was the game plan, and we were really fortunate to get up the mountain, and then we were able to get our cars, and we were able to make it back home. And so it was, I think, that kind of wave of relief that Samantha felt, knowing their family was okay. I had that when I got to my house. So
Did the other two people know each other, or were they just combining up too? So it was like three
no,
unknowns, or
there's three unknowns, yeah, as it turned out. So, but yeah, they kind of done the same thing, kind of partnered up, and it makes sense too. Like one person per car versus fill the car up. So I'm glad we were able to do that. Maybe more people were able to get up the mountain as a result, by carpooling effectively. So, but it was just I didn't want to risk getting stuck there. I was like, I'm gonna do just whatever I can to get back. So
Yeah,
yeah,
especially
it
because
doesn't.
like our families didn't know where we were either.
yeah.
Like Jen didn't know Jake couldn't get home, and like it was just kind of this suspended in time feeling.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I imagine for them it was like a less worry about. I don't want to put it. Well, less worry about whether you're safe or not, but I mean, you guys were needed at that point in time to be with your family and your kids, and to provide that sort of support. Like, I mean, I'm sure both of you would have much rather been at home during that situation, and your spouses or your friends could have used you there. Would have been extremely valuable. So I'm sure it was lonely for them without you there.
Yeah, they were probably pretty worried, maybe more worried than about me not knowing, and because they knew they were okay. But it's funny, you were kind of pointing it out, Jim and Samantha was pointing out. It's like once you kind of cross something off the list in the situation, you kind of move on to the next order of priority, and we can go there next. But I mean, when I got home, I had that wave of relief. Okay, I knew everybody was okay, and then it was, I kind of had my bases covered, so, and I was really fortunate to not have a tree on my house like Samantha did, or any major property damage. Next door neighbor behind me, it's kind of lots of people with trees on their houses, and much worse. But once we were okay, it was kind of how can we help, and that was kind of the natural shift. Next for me is my bases are covered. How can I help somebody else?
So Jake, before we move on to that, you told me the story. We'll turn this a little bit to a financial sort of, I guess, lesson or experience. Like you had a cash issue, right? You had a money problem getting from the airport to Asheville.
Um, well, me personally didn't, and I feel really fortunate. You know, um, a couple things come to mind. I mean, number one, I'm always going to have credit cards, and I know a lot of folks they kind of lean on debit cards and not a fan of credit cards for one reason or another. Totally valid, but on the financial front, in a pinch, a credit card is going to cover you. It's going to extend what you need financially to make it through a situation. So, I knew I was very comfortable that I had whatever I needed, via credit. I didn't need cash on me at all times. I do carry cash with me on trips for any type of emergency. So, did have cash to get through that. And when we got back to Asheville, and as things were starting to, people were kind of starting to come out after the storm, nobody took cards. So outside of Asheville, credit cards got you through and got me back home. But to get back in town, it was cash only. So, and all the ATMs were dry. So there's no cash in any of the ATMs. So I do keep a safe with emergency cash, not a whole heck of a lot, but enough to get through a pinch. So I again, just kind of, I think on the financial planning front, felt good that I was prepared in that way. And was, again, kind of once I knew my situation was taken care of, was happy to lend out some cash to other folks who needed to gather supplies and whatnot. So that was my cash situation. I don't know if I
Samantha, did
told
you
you the
have
same
any
way
cash
before.
laying around? I would not have had any cash anywhere.
If I had been home, I would have had maybe like $20, in a drawer somewhere. But because I don't really keep cash on hand. I do tend to like try and find some for when I travel just in case. I probably had a little bit on me, but like when I was so as I was trying to like plan my route home from Columbus, I was like, I want to do the drive in one thing. Like I just got to get there. And my friend was like, okay, like maybe don't because you'll end up getting there in the dark and you don't know what the roads are going to be like. And so I had planned to make it to Charlotte and stay the night there. And like as I got closer and closer to Charlotte, I was like trying to think of these things. I'm like, oh, I need to probably prepare in some way before I make it into Asheville. And at that point, I had been getting some news on the radio about sort of what was going on, and so before I even got to my hotel in Charlotte, I um, went to a store and got a generator, which was like the last one they had. I saw online; it was in stock in the back, and like got this guy to go find it for me. Um, and then the next morning, stopped at the bank in Charlotte and was able to get cash out. And I took a lot out because for the same reason as Jake said, like people might need it and they can't get it. And so, and as I was in the line, like the person in front of me was also getting cash, even though they lived in Charlotte. Like some people were starting to kind of scramble there. But the teller was talking about how they were running low all the way in Charlotte in cash. But I was able to get some, and I still have some in an envelope from that because it not too long after people were starting to take credit cards, but it's like in that space where you don't know how long it's going to be, and it's a really jarring position to all of a sudden not have access to the things you might need, like on a dime, like we are accustomed to. Um, yeah.
How
Yeah.
long did that last? The need for from cash from start to finish. Like when were you fully like, all right, I can use my cards again and can sort of act
Maybe
a little bit
like
normal.
I feel like maybe around a week or two. Like
Yeah,
people
that's what I would
were
say.
starting to get a little bit of maybe at like a week and a half, and then I would say probably by like I don't know that second week. I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean it was sporadic. Like some places were getting
Yeah.
it on probably after a week, and then other places 2 or 3 weeks, like just for whatever reason. And communication, internet signal or service was also kind of as it came back on, it was sporadic, and there were folks that did go multiple weeks without internet service.
Or phone
Um,
service.
or phone service. So, it was just kind of roll of the dice in some ways when you got services restored. And talk about water, that just literally just got restored this week, drinkable water to the city of Asheville through the water system here. So
Would
we're 50 days on, 60 days on.
Yeah, and
do you
and the
guys
thing about the credit card was that so gas we were having this like gas supply issue, but it wasn't actually a shortage. It was just that the gas stations didn't have power or the ability to take credit cards, and so it was like this the gas was there but nobody could access it, and that was, a different experience too.
they couldn't act you couldn't access you could get to the gas station, but you couldn't access it necessarily not because they didn't have it, but because you didn't have the means to pay for it because there's no power? Or was it also that the
Well,
gas
the gas
stations couldn't
didn't
provide it
have
because the
power, so
power was out?
right, they couldn't pump it. And then once they could, there was this like, can we take credit cards thing? But I think it took so long for them to even get the power that it was kind of like solving itself by then. So, the cash became less needed, but it was everybody was preparing because they're like, when we can get gas, like that's what we need to spend with the cash for generators and
Yeah.
everything.
And I mean, what the major grocery store, I'll just add to the gas, which is, I mean, you think about the necessities, gas, fuel, food, water, those types of things. The major grocery store in this area is called Ingles. And all of those stores were cash only for a long time, limited in how many items you could purchase. And their entire distribution center, which serves the whole Southeast, was completely flooded. They're by the Swananoa River, and so that whole system was out, and it was cash only for food for a lot of folks for quite a while.
Was that chaotic for people? Was
It was,
there like, I mean, what was the were people waiting outside? Were people begging? Like, what was it? Was it an issue where people or were people generous at this time? I imagine, you have a limited amount of cash. Like, you want to be generous and you want to be fair and help each other. It sounds like both of you did, but then there's this like, how long is this going to go on? And you have to protect to make sure that you have enough for yourself. Like, was there any
yeah.
chaos around that?
Oh, it was very, very chaotic. I mean, once the stores opened a couple of days after the storm, the lines to get in any grocery store were hours long. And my only experience getting into a grocery store, again, we're really fortunate. We keep, like, we don't have, a hoard of food, but we have kind of always a stockpile of what we need for any type of circumstance. And so we kind of had our needs set, but we wanted to top off on a few things, and we wanted to prepare some food for some of the shelters. And so I wanted to get to a grocery store. I got there first thing in the morning. There's already a line. It wasn't as long as the line at the store kind of across the road, which looked to be hours long. You get in, they limit the number of people that are in the store. Half the lights are dimmed, limited power. They're running on a generator, cash only. You got somebody, coaching you they kind of let you in one at a time, or they were there, and they kind of coaching you on what you might want to get, things that will are shelf stable, maybe have more nutrients and calories, things like that, which is just a surreal experience, to, kind of get coaching on survival food at a grocery store and what's happening here. And anyway, you get in and it's limited in the number of items you can get, but there are people that are, arguing at the managers, asking for more, and can't let it happen. And that was my experience, at least. But I think that was, generally probably experience a lot of stores. Very chaotic.
Who was running that? Who was like running the coaching? Was that just people within the store, or was that like
Yeah.
FEMA or somebody from the outside?
No, that was just was people in the store, and I that's the thing. It's in my experience in this particular disaster, I mean, resources, they were coming, and support was coming from all kinds of organizations everywhere. But what you saw day in and day out, and the experiences that you heard from everybody were neighbors helping neighbors. That's just kind of how it went. And so, the folks that are running the grocery store, I mean, the folks that would be bagging groceries or getting the carts, they're there doing what they can to, help people out and kind of coach them on what they might want to get. So it's just people helping people.
Samantha, did you have food issues, or were you? It sounds like Jake's a little bit. He's got a little survivalist in him. You know what I mean? Sounds pretty prepared, like which I would expect from Jake. Like, I mean,
Sure.
my house is not like that at all. Like, we wouldn't know what to do within hours. So, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, uh, again, because my friend filled my car, I had all of this surplus of food, but I also not, I mean, there's stuff in the pantry, but not to prepare for something like this, just whatever, I had ordered. Um, so I didn't really have food issues, which was great. Like I didn't actually have to go to a grocery store during those times, which would have been very overwhelming to me, I think. In a lot of places outside of the grocery stores, there were all these various spots set up so that people could come get food, hot meals, like a lot of community support for everyone. And I think that was really special to see and hear about, just all of the support and like mutual aid um, for, a lot of people who, maybe they don't have the ability to get cash, but also so many people are just, they lost everything, like some of the homes they had to just save themselves. Um, and, a lot of people's businesses were lost. So there was all of this like fear around financial security moving forward. And so to take off of their plate the load of having to like find food and get food and have these resources, I think was really special.
Where did you go when you got home? Because your house was not livable, or were you able to get into your house?
Well, um, yeah. So the first thing I did was went to my son's dad's house and made sure they were okay in there, and we then went to my house to see it. And Hudson, my son, hadn't seen it yet. Knowing that it would be a little scary to see, because the part where the tree fell was our bedrooms.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and so we got there, and the like my neighbor and Han got right to work on getting the tree off the roof, and so we could tarp it. And so, I was kind of trying to figure out like, can we stay here and what's the damage? And for the first 2 nights, maybe three, we did stay there, and it was like, okay, maybe we can stay here while this half of the house is repaired. And it was just like as we got into it, and as I was trying to like save things that had gotten wet, it was just really clear that that wasn't possible, and we weren't going to be able to stay there, and neither were any of our things. And so we had to basically pack up the entire house and get everything into a pod storage in the driveway. And um, it was kind of this scramble, and nobody was connected. And I was, I didn't know where we were going to go. And we were actually at Jake's house doing some laundry and taking showers. And I was sharing with them of like, I thought we were going to be able to stay, but we can't. And Jake knew of a neighbor of his who had actually a couple neighbors who had Airbnbs that were likely empty because nobody could make it in. Um, and reached out to one of them, and they were really gracious and open and allowed us to stay here even before talking to me or having a financial agreement, and that was really grounding. I felt it's like you want to be in your home, but also like it wasn't safe to be there. And it's a tough decision to like take your kid from your home, but knowing that we'd have this like really sweet and cozy and comfortable neighborhood to be in was, kind of like a grounding point during all of that. Cause it was about, I mean, it took probably a week of like just work from sun up to sundown to get my house packed up. And it was like a rush because everything was getting exposed to mold and moisture every day it was left in. So being able to like come home at the end of the day and have like a safe place to be was really helpful. Um,
Let me go back real quick. I'm just curious about this. It's not financial related. So when you're talking about community with food, was that like grills? People like bringing grills out, like cooking things, or were they just out just like sharing, or was that like FEMA or some other organization doing that? Just, just curious.
yeah. Some of the food trucks, that had
Food
supplies
trucks?
and, like their supplies were going to go, and some restaurants who were like, let's use what we have. We're just making free community meals. And some people were out there like with grills and just helping. And then eventually World Central Kitchen came in. I don't know on what day that was, but they're still set up in town, at on the South Slope, like delivering meals to schools and like having meals available for people to come. And so they were also then giving food to all these people who were willing to make it, like the food trucks and the restaurants. Like they were donating food so they could keep doing it at these different spots in town.
So the restaurant community there, which is big in Asheville, the ones that survive that, I know, like, I don't want to take this lightly because I know there's a lot of the restaurants and bars and so forth that lost everything. But the ones that did survive, they totally gathered their resources and they went out and started helping the community.
Yeah, it was
That's awesome.
is and it's like it really speaks a lot to our community. It's Asheville's a special place, and like to see it play out in this way where, I mean, really just everyone you saw, businesses or individual people, were just like, "Are you okay? What do you need?" And um, yeah,
Yeah. Um, Jake, you had I don't want to call you lucky, but your property went pretty much
Yeah.
undamaged, and you had water and power throughout this whole thing. And so you turned, and I got a couple questions about this, is you turned essentially to helping others. So one of the first questions I want to ask is like, what did you do and how did you do it? And then like, how did you figure out like what to do? Like so many people in these situations like can be left like sort of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. Like, was there a place you went? How did you figure that piece out?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, my family were so fortunate. We didn't have any property damage, and like you said, I mean, we were the one of the only neighborhoods in town that had water. Our neighborhood kind of has this private well system that we all joke about. It costs too much, everybody's water bills just, nobody enjoys paying it, but we were fortunate to have that, and we were also lucky in that they buried our power lines a couple of years ago. We live in a very wooded area, and that's why they did it. And so got our power back pretty quickly. So, yeah, I mean, you check the boxes. Okay, I'm covered. I've got what I need. And then for me, it was just I can't just sit here and the world around me is chaos, and so many people are in really awful situations. I just want to do whatever I can, and I don't think there was an answer for like where I went. It was just whatever I heard about, especially in the first couple of weeks. I just wanted to jump to it and do it. It's like the animal shelter, the Humane Society down the street. We heard word that they didn't have water or power, and they needed laundry done. I was like, well, we got laundry, we've got water, and so we just kept making runs to do laundry. And there's a shelter there, for women and children kind of nearby our house, and they were out of water and power and they needed food. So we were, helping to make meals for them. And we had resources, and so we knew our bases were covered. And then once, we did get some cell signal back, we were able to check on various volunteer opportunities that were around, and the United Way had a lot of opportunities. I took advantage of some of those and participated there. And in the first few days, one of the main needs was were welfare checks. So basically, because cell phone signal went out, thousands and thousands of people had been calling the city or the register of deeds and like, what's going on? Where's our family? And they were submitting missing persons requests or reports. And so there were, I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands, maybe close to 20,000 people reported that way, and everybody needed to be checked on. So those were the welfare checks in our county and in our community. And so the only way to accomplish that is with volunteers. So I was able to be a small part of a really big undertaking for a lot of volunteers to just check a few names off those lists, and make sure that the folks that were unaccounted for, that their loved ones knew that they were okay and that they were okay. So was took part in some of those as well.
That's awesome. Did you guys do that as a family or was that
No,
just Jake
no, it
making
was
his runs?
yeah, it was I have two small children. I mean, 7 and 4, and they can't the best place for them, the safest place for them is in the safest. It's our house. We have, we were safe and had resources. So, I just kind of went out myself and Jennifer and the girls. They were at home and were staying safe. And yeah, so I was able to get out and do some of that. But there were lots of other volunteers, and you'd just be side by side with people, and it wasn't. It was that was interesting. I'll just make a comment on that because it wasn't you're side by side with other people volunteering. And it's not you're just not making chit chat. You're not small talk. It's just you're in the experience of the present moment, and you're just there for the same reason. And that was really interesting. But it's like a way of coming together with people that I don't think I'd really experienced quite the same before.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, winter. It doesn't sound like this is anything like a winter storm or icy roads. Like this is like disaster. Like the roads and the blockage and all that stuff. This just sounds like something you don't see in a normal sort of. I feel
It's
like it was different than a normal hurricane. And maybe it was the combined flooding or whatever. It just seems very different.
it was
Maybe it's the
very
town or
different.
the yeah.
I mean, I'll just add, one other experience I had, and we were out volunteering, delivering pallets of water and MREs that had come in. There was a kind of the United Way and the National Guard had kind of paired up, but they needed folks to deliver things, so we were out delivering stuff, and we were at kind of a large. It was a kind of low. It was a lower income apartment complex, and um, you know number one, a lot of people had left, which was interesting. But when we pulled up, the manager of the apartment complex came out, and I mean, it was as if he had been awake for a week straight, and just the struggles that people had, just living their day to day without the resources that they needed, needing medication that needed to be refrigerated, and there was only one mini fridge connected to a generator, and they're all sharing it. And social services hadn't been by in 3 days, and they didn't know who. It was just that level of chaos was really, and that was probably just the tip of the iceberg for was other people's experiences, but um, yeah, it was very different than any other sort of natural
Stuff
weather
you don't
event.
even think about. You would never
Yeah,
cross your mind. Um,
yeah.
Samantha, you had another sort of pile on you. Your house is destroyed and or not destroyed, but not livable, and um, you know this sort of turns a little bit financial because people are out of work. Like we talk about these money issues, like cash or credit card, but quite frankly, there's no way to make income in a lot of these cases. And I was just curious about Asheville's such a service wide industry,
Mhm.
like I got questions like how people are going to recover, do they leave? But that's besides the point. You were under probably additional stress because you prepare tax returns. We had a tax deadline to deal with, and the way we operate, it's just purely based on communication that Jake had mentioned, and being online. And um, so just share a little bit about like that extra burden that was sort of hanging over your head, and what that was like, sort of moving and getting your family safe, but also sort of having to worry about like, hey, how do I work?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, I mean, because even when we were in Chicago, we were kind of pushing up to the deadline. So it was like, okay, like I'm kind of having to push some stuff to next week because we're here for our team bonding and meeting, and then next week couldn't happen. And it was, so it's like in those situations, and I can kind of remember this happening during the COVID pandemic a little bit, where it's like this thing at hand is what requires my attention most, but this other thing's really important because not all my clients are here. Some of them are all over the place, and like they need help even though I can't give it. And so that was really stressful. It was like an added just kind of stressor in the back of my mind, even though I knew it wasn't the most important thing at the moment. And it felt really good this to during this experience to have a team and have you all and be able to like step in and take care of everything that could be taken care of and just let people know that I was unavailable. One thing that Jake and I both did, knowing that service was cut off, was like before we left Chicago, put it in our out of office and just say like, basically I don't know when I will be back online, because we didn't know what we're going home to. And it was a few weeks before I could even get into my inbox reliably, maybe more. Um, and like it was, I can recall back to the COVID pandemic and feeling, like we didn't have a lot of support then, like we didn't have this team that was able to step in. And the difference that I felt from like a support and being held in that way was, it really made all the difference for me to be able to really focus on what was in front of me and what was important, and our lives, and finding somewhere to be and how to like soothe the situation for my kid and for myself and the upheaval. And so yeah, it was definitely an added stressor. And to feel that experience of community was really special too, of like, within our team that we've built. And we came off of this bonded experience in Chicago, and it felt like we were really living these things that we talk about are important to us.
So I wasn't trying to like promote how we handled it. It was more
No,
like
it's
this.
true.
But I feel like what was, I think sort of this COVID and everything, and we're being able to work remotely. Like I started to think about it, and like, what if we were all there and all in that situation and we couldn't like support each other? Like, how I think I'll call them old days, like 4 years ago, like that's like when most of the way, people worked, like you're all in one office, you're in all one place. And so like these things we sort of have to do for the SEC, like we have to have a disaster recovery plan, at least for me as a business owner, like became a little bit more front of mind to say, hey, we should really actually uh, put some thought into this, like how we're going to operate in these situations, because people still need to work and they still need to make money, and have a plan around that. So that really hit me pretty hard.
Yeah,
So we've
and
been talking a lot. Go ahead, Samantha. Just add. What did you say?
I was going to say that, this, it's some, several of my business clients they've lost their entire business. It's in the River Arts District, people lost everything for their businesses. And, these are people who have bootstrapped their business and they've put all of their resources and time into this, and it's gone. And a lot of them want to rebuild, and they're trying to raise the funds. And, a lot of them don't, their liability insurance doesn't cover floods. It's just not a thing that is built into their insurance. And um, so it's this, for these people who like their financial well-being is so secured to a physical domain, it's really scary for this thing to happen.
Yeah, yeah. That's really hard for me to wrap my head around. And I was going to ask you because you've been going through a lot of this, and I know we've shared some resources out there. And we have been talking a long time, but like, what's it been like for you to access resources, to rebuild your house, to get another house paid for? Like, how has that all been working out? Has it been smooth? Have you run into a bunch of snags? Like, what does that look like? And would you recommend like people really look through their insurance policies and figure these things out now that this has happened to you guys?
Yeah. Well, there's a few pieces to that question, but it's been, I would say, there's all these pieces, right? Like there's the car insurance, and they really saved me into getting home. And like that felt really supportive, right? And that's not always what you feel with insurance companies. And, uh, I was able to get a new car. Like my car that was crushed is still in my driveway because it can't be removed. It's still trapped. And so, that worked well, and I felt really grateful to have paid for the more expensive insurance too, right? Because otherwise there'd be all these deductibles. Um and then like the home insurance is a little bit of a different headache. And I feel pretty like, based especially on the stories I've heard from a lot of other people, like my insurance is taking care of me pretty well. But I still don't have the money because of it has to like go to the mortgage company, and then they have to cut me a check. And but my contractor, who's actively working on my house, he needs funds to buy all these materials so that we can get back in our home. And so, I've had to put a lot of cash out of pocket. And I feel grateful that I happen to have this cash reserve, because I wouldn't always, like, even a couple years ago, I might not have been able to swing this, and it's like this relief that I've set that up for myself, and also some fear of like, what if the check never comes? And then this is, a financial burden that puts me back. And, that's been overwhelming, but it's just kind of how it is. And like, you just got to kind of hope that it's going to work out after all of these months. Now it's been what, 2 months, I guess, or almost.
Oh, so,
Yeah.
so you, and I think, like, I don't want to use the word lucky, but you guys are in a pretty good position where you had everything covered. I met there's stories upon stories that where people didn't have the flood insurance and they're having to rebuild without these things. And um, so you've been able to access the resources and be able to move forward. And overall, it sounds like that's been a fairly, once you got back into communication with internet and phone service and so forth, like that's been a fairly, I don't want to say seamless, but decent process for you.
In the beginning, it was really stressful and overwhelming because there weren't any adjusters here at first. And so they were not wanting to release anything without an adjuster coming out. And I had, I had access for them to get into my house and start fixing it. Like I had access to those resources on the contracting side, and then they were held up by all of this. And it's like, all I want to do is get back home. But all these pieces, the unknown of it was really a lot to manage on top of being displaced and out of my house and not having any routine and not being able to like have the space I need to even process this emotionally, let alone like there's just so much to do all the time related to the financial stuff. But then I also have to be packing the house. And so it's like every time I try to focus on the financial pieces, and like it was just so many phone calls and paperwork. And then like that's taking away from this other thing that really needs to be done. And trying to balance all of that was a lot, and it still feels like that to me. Like I'm still doing a lot of those balancing and having to like go to my house and all these things, but it's like to the outside world, it's kind of like it's been almost 2 months, and it's like there's some moving on that's happening, and I still feel really buried by it. And um trying to work through that, and while also having to like get back to work and get back to like life in a sense of normalcy is a lot.
So
And
without, like, you had the proper things in place, but without that, I mean, you still feel stressed, like you still feel like overwhelmed and it's a burden. So even having the right stuff in place, like I can't imagine not having the right stuff in place, like
Yeah.
the bigger burden and stress that people are dealing with. And quite frankly, you're 100% right. Like when Lynn texted me saying you finally got home, like I was unaware that you guys were going through this. Like it was a perfectly sunny day in Maryland. Like we were playing baseball, we were doing like whatever, and that text, I'm like it just like sort of blew me away. Like to the fact that these two different worlds could be happening at the same time. And so this world we work in, it's is kind of remote and you can do things from anywhere. Like everybody else is sort of like not intentionally or not in a negative way, but you just move on with your daily lives and you don't really recognize the stress that you're still going through. And, I'm guilty of that right now. You know what I mean? Like we still communicate and we're still working together. And it's sort of, I would forget like a lot of times, hey, what you're still going through, just being in a house that's not your own is a stressful situation.
I
Yeah,
think
and
I'll
when
But
we
just
were still in
add.
Chicago, that or right, like I guess my last night and morning, Lynn and her husband were still in town, and so it was like they were like, come to dinner with us, come to breakfast with us, like really trying to show up and show support because I was spiraling and trying to figure out a way to get home. And it's like we have this remote team, and so we're not together a lot, but then to like have that access of support and not be just like by myself in this Airbnb, like trying not to spin out of control, was really great. And that like she was able to tell you that because she was there to see what was really going on. And like I had some friends who before they went out of range had sent me videos, and so it was like and then all the like I could see everything that was happening and have no way to know if they were okay. And like that is a dark place to be, if especially if you're isolated. Um,
Jake, what were you going to say?
I was going to comment on just kind of think the idea of, these two different worlds. Samantha's, pointing to that in her experience now, where a lot of the community is resuming normal life, getting back to a normal routine, and even your experience, Jim, where it's like you're playing baseball on a sunny day in Maryland, in one world, and then in another world, it's very different. And I think um, that's really one of the takeaways that I've had from this whole experience is that you know there's still so many people that need help and support. It's not over. This ordeal isn't over for them, for so many. And Samantha too. You're still kind of in the midst of things in that way. And so, but again, just the community coming together um, has been really great to see throughout all this, and kind of making sure, I think nobody kind of gets left behind, stuck in their ordeal. But yeah, there's two different worlds. That contrast has been something really pronounced that I've observed.
Asheville will recover.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, there'll be some change, but I think we'll see it through.
Just the comment Samantha used to always make to me when she moved to Asheville was people in Asheville are there because they want to be in Asheville. It's not like you move there for work or something. So I imagine people love that community, and hopefully they'll get rebuilt back to where it was, and maybe even better. So is
yeah.
that your
It'll be different, and it'll take a long time. And what it looks like on the other side, yeah, we don't know what that'll be, but yeah, people live here because they want to live here. A lot of people, and so it's a new normal, and we'll rebuild from here. That's what I think.
well, guys? Thank you so much for experience. We didn't talk a lot about the financial things, but I think a lot of them came out just like what you guys experienced and how you've been affected. And, we're super grateful that you guys are okay and in good shape. And, knowing people like yourselves there, it has a bigger impact. I mean, without having you guys there, I probably wouldn't have been, affected or have as much uh, thought about it, I guess is the right word, but it's definitely a different experience that we haven't seen in a long time. So grateful for you guys. Thank you so much for sharing your story here, and I will certainly think different from a financial standpoint and have a little more cash on hand, and I got to go check my insurance policies and that sort of thing. You just sort
Yes.
of get through
Yeah.
these things without really thinking about them a lot of times in today's world. But this one it's a longer, bigger impact that I don't think we've seen. So, um,
Yeah.
anything you would do different, real quick, before we end? Any way you would have prepared better?
I mean, I think if I had known before we left that this storm was coming in the even if I had known what they were reporting, because I didn't even hear about that it was coming at all really until we were in Chicago. um, I maybe would have, I don't know, tried to prepare a little more at home, but really I don't know what I could have done. The,
Well, you probably
the
wouldn't have
trees
even
and roots.
gone
Well, yeah,
if you knew it was going to be bad. Like you probably wouldn't have left.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I feel grateful that we weren't, like, my son and I weren't in my house, so it's like it worked
yeah.
out that I was gone because he was with his dad. And it would have been a really scary experience. So I don't know. I guess it's
I,
hard to rewrite things.
it's really hard. It's really. I think about. I mean, it's. I'd say it's the roll of the dice, and it really is. I mean, you think about all just the trees that are coming down, in particular, and it could have been my house instead of my next door neighbor's house, and it was Samantha's house instead of my house, and that was just the case all over the place. And there's no way that you can realistically prepare. You don't know that it's going to have. It's a risk that exists out there, and he just reinforces to me um, just that preparedness of the boring stuff. It's the boring stuff that it just check your insurance. I mean, I've since reviewed my insurance again, and it's just the boring stuff. Use whatever motivation you need to do it, whether it's seeing what's happened in Asheville, or you don't want the experience of loss to be the reason you're going through those things. So do the boring stuff, and stay consistent with it. But it's at the end of the day, it's kind of, it could be you, could be me, with some of these things. So
Yeah, I mean, I
Awesome,
had
guys.
I was going through like my estate planning in like the months leading up to this, but I was finishing it up. Like it was supposed to be finished up right around now, and I wanted to put it off, even knowing this. And I was like, okay, this isn't the time to put off the important things because we just don't know what's going to happen. And I'd rather be prepared, even if it's annoying to get there.
Yeah, I don't want to go down that road. Like, I mean, but like even that, like estate planning, like there was a lot of loss and casualties in this, and so those things are important to have in place just so you can move forward. But yeah, I didn't even think about that, to be honest with you. That just sort of hit me kind of hard. Um, but anyways, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and thank you for sharing it with our community, and thank you for being who you are.
thanks for the conversation. Yeah, it's helpful to talk about.
Yeah.